All right, folks, it may be a new and much brighter day in Europe. Perhaps it is true that there is a mass movement of people waking up around the world, because today was election day across many countries in the western half of the European Union. We're talking about Western Europe here. And we saw large, sweeping, and oftentimes historic victories for right-wingers, nationalists, anti-globalists, etc., across the board. And let's be clear about that. We're not just talking about one minor movement in a single country. This is not Orban in Hungary or Meloni in Italy even. This happened in several different countries in Western Europe at the same time. And you may look at that and say, well, Vince, good for Europe. I'm happy that they're starting to take back their civilizations, but you're American, so why does it really matter to you? Well, let me be clear about this. I am making this video, just to pander to the European audience. Sure, I mean, we do have them, so shout out to you guys in the comments. But more importantly and seriously than that, I'm making this video because I often believe it is true that the politics of Western Europe can mirror or even predict that of America. And you see where I'm going with that? Donald Trump, our own election in 2024. I think that's significant. And let me be clear, that's not just conjecture. This is something we've seen historically to be true. I think back to 2016. Few people remember this. Not a lot of people talk about it, but Brexit actually happened just a couple of months before the election of Donald Trump. And what was going on there? Well, in the UK, a lot of Brits were unhappy over issues of sovereignty, perceived trade imbalances with the European Union, nationalism, globalism, the rise of Nigel Farage, stuff like that. What happens? In a shocking political victory that few were expecting, Brexit actually passed in the UK. And then just a few months later, in another shocking upset political victory, Donald Trump defeats Hillary Clinton for many of the same reasons.
Funny, isn't it? Funny, isn't it?
That's not the only example in history. I could go on. I could talk about how Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher basically came to power around the same time, but I'm not going to bore you here today. The point is this. If this is what we're seeing in Europe, it may be what we're seeing in America for another specific reason, is because if in 2016, Brexit and Trump were driven by similar issues, so true is the case in 2024, because it's no secret, a big reason this happened across the EU is because European people are unhappy over mass migration, over immigration, the refugee, the migrants, et cetera, et cetera. Look in America, what's a big issue at the current moment? Same exact thing. So that's something to consider, and that's, again, a big reason why I say I'm not here to make any official predictions, but if it is true, we just saw a political mandate of nationalist fervor across much of Europe, and we've seen that same story happen before, then come November, don't be surprised if the same exact issue, immigration, drives Donald Trump to victory in 2024.
Would you support a new government program that would deport all people living in the U.S. illegally? And that finds majority favor. That finds 6 in 10.
But with that said, let us cover today, and let me tell you about some of what happened in these EU countries. And again, keep in mind, this is all on the same day, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so in France, the Marine Le Pen party national rally won a historic 31.5% of the EU vote, which had forced Macron to dissolve the national parliament. So basically, Emmanuel Macron, you know, the liberal globalist, he feels like he's been there for about a decade, but finally his chains have been broken because he just suffered a historic upset, and they're doing an extra election in a couple months here that we'll tell you about soon. In Germany, the AFD, which is a nationalist party there, has surged to become the second largest party, and the Liberal parties massively tanked in their share of the German parliament. In Belgium, the Belgian prime minister, who is a globalist, liberal, etc., resigned after his crushing defeat against the political right there. In Italy, Meloni's Brother of Italy party wins in a historic landslide. In Austria, FPO doubles their seats and becomes the largest party in the nation. So good there for Austria. And then currently speaking, In Spain, the right is currently, I think they're still counting, beating the left by 10%. And in Luxembourg, first ever seat won by the ADR, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a nationalist party there. And so that's why I say, guys, this is not just a random phenomenon in one country. And Wokeness here, shout out to him, pointed out 7 different nations where we saw basically the same thing happening to various degrees. Again, I point to America in November and say, clearly, if the European people are so pissed off about mass migration there, which, by the way, one could argue is, I mean, I know I'm not trying to downplay the European problem, but when you consider raw numbers, is arguably a much bigger problem with Joe Biden and the border in America. But same exact sentiments here. If people there are that pissed off, and if once formerly very liberal countries, I mean, since the end of World War II, essentially, Europe has always been significantly actually more politically left-wing in general than America has. If mass migration can cause such issues there where people who formerly probably were voting for other candidates rally that much around the nationalist, the conservative, etc., then I think very good news here for Donald Trump. So in other news, and we continue basically our coverage here, I brought this up earlier, but French President Emmanuel Macron announced in response that he will be dissolving the National Assembly. So that's essentially like the French Parliament here, and is calling for snap elections on June 30th and July 7th. This announcement came after European Parliament exit polls showed right-wing parties trouncing the competition. And so at first glance, I mean, I'm saying the same thing as you. He's protecting democracy by literally dissolving the parliament. And so what this is essentially a desperate attempt for Macron to get rid of this current parliament. We're going to try to do another election to hope we do better in the next election. It's kind of weird or whatever. I'm not going to lie, though, I don't fully understand French politics, but Macron said, quote, he is worried about a rise of nationalists, and he called that a danger for France and the rest of Europe. Yeah, it's certainly a danger to your power, buddy, okay? And by the way, you're going to see these headlines all the time, okay? Crazy far-right nationalists are winning across Europe. They're going to try to say this is literally Hitler. Do not buy the paranoia. It is a bunch of crap, okay? As Vivek Ramaswamy very accurately said in response to all of these elections, he says, the press is claiming that the, quote, far right is dominating the EU parliamentary elections, but here's another possibility. Believing in national borders and the rule of law is actually just mainstream. And Elon Musk replies here, exactly. And that is, of course, so true. So don't let them, scare you or, drive you away. Say, oh, maybe these guys in Europe aren't so good. No, again, they're saying the same exact thing about these European parties that they say about Donald Trump. I don't buy it. Nobody buys it. Frankly, if you're so mad about the rise of nationalism across Europe, which I don't understand how it's a bad thing, but whatever, then maybe you shouldn't have cheered on when the EU let millions of people, much like the United States, who are not from Europe and share nothing in common, just flood in and cause a bunch of problems and tell the people that they're racist if they oppose it, right? Maybe you should have not tried to beat down the European spirit for so long, try to tell people to be ashamed of their civilization, etc., because over time, people became sick and tired of it. And so Emmanuel Macron, obviously full of crap. And, if anything, I think is a danger to democracy or a danger to France. Arguably, it is now trying to play around with the election system and dissolving parliament to try to give you another chance to win the election this time. But whatever, check out Emmanuel Macron seething and coping because the nationalists are starting to reject him in the country of France. Check it out.
J'ai décidé de vous redonner le choix de notre avenir parlementaire par le vote. Je dissous donc ce soir l'Assemblée nationale. Je signerai dans quelques instants le décret de convocation des élections législatives qui se tiendront le 30 juin pour le premier tour et le 7 juillet pour le second.
So yeah, there was him coping and seething, and as I said earlier, Belgium's globalist prime minister, Alex de Croo, whatever, unexpectedly resigned after a brutal EU election where the right-wing party swept the floor. So he just said, all right, I give up, I'm out. And so that happened. Obviously, Marine Le Pen's party doing great in France was a big deal. And I know some people may say, oh, Vince, Marine Le Pen is a sellout. It's like, okay, I don't know enough about her, to tell you the truth, to make an honest assessment of that. But what I will say is that I think it's objectively true. She's a huge upgrade over Emmanuel Macron still, right? And I think very often political change happens slow, and that's what we need to be understanding of. Even if all of these European countries now have right-wing parliaments, doesn't mean things will change overnight, because much like America, I'm sure there will be many of them that are weak or cowardly or sellouts or whatever. The point is, political change needs to start somewhere, and I see this as a big indicator of us moving in the right direction, or I should say Europe moving in the right direction. But similar argument I could say about Donald Trump, right? Because a lot of people looked at his first term and say it wasn't good enough, and I'm sure they'll say that if he wins a second term as well. But the point is, you gotta start somewhere, right? Much like in the United States, where the political system has been so broken and so made of a uniparty and orthodox for such a long time, someone needs to come along, punch a hole in the wall and say, we're not doing it anymore. And in Europe, I think the same exact thing is happening, and it's certainly very optimistic to see. And by the way, I should probably also talk about the UK a little bit. They did not have their elections tonight, but since I did bring up, hey, Brexit back in 2016, Donald Trump back in 2016, I guess it's also important to note that Nigel Farage, which for you kids out there, including myself, you know, maybe you have to look it up, but he is essentially the creator of the entire Brexit movement. He's kind of the godfather of that. Been directly out of UK politics for a couple years. Announced about a week ago that he himself will be returning in the year 2024. So very fitting, right? 2016 with Brexit. Now, as Donald Trump rides to try to win another election in 2024, here comes along Nigel Farage in the UK. Check that out.
I stood here a week ago and I said, look, hands up. I've been nonplussed by Rishi calling a short-term election. Doesn't give me the time to fight a constituency. Doesn't give me the time to build up data. I thought the rational thing to do was not to stand, but to do my bit, as I put it, supporting the country around the party. And for the last week, that is what I've been doing. I've been travelling all around the country. I've had the honour of appearing with Piers Morgan on Question Time, amongst other things. I've been to Dover to talk about the migrant crisis that I alone predicted 4.5 years ago. But more importantly, I've been out on the streets, meeting an awful lot of people. And interestingly, a lot of young people. And I'll tell you this, and you won't have got this yet, and the pollsters won't yet have picked this up, but I promise you, after 30 years of experience in this game, something is happening out there. There is a rejection of the political class going on in this country in a way that has not been seen in modern times.
So yeah, to recap here today, right-wing nationalists have swept elections in nations all across Europe, and I think that might be inspiring certainly to a lot of American conservatives, because we've long had this attitude about Europe that it's just such a lost cause. We look at these people like, what the heck is wrong with Europe? I mean, you know, they used to freaking rule the world essentially, and now they're just even more left-wing than us, and they're just doing all this nonsense. Well, clearly it's a sign maybe that people are starting to wake up. God bless them for doing so. And, you know, sometimes all it takes is a little bit of a kick, right? All it takes is a little bit of push them too far and suddenly people get angry and you see a response. That happened with mass migration in Europe. Could that be similar or parallel to what we're seeing in the United States with Donald Trump? Because I certainly think that's true as well. 2020, a lot of people who hated Donald Trump back then, you now see slowly creeping over. Some of them are a little bit more quiet. Some are more vocal about it, but they look at the border, which, much like Europe, same exact issue there. They also look at the economy and just the general failures of Joe Biden, and maybe it's time here for another awakening in America, another nationalist one similar to like what we saw back in 2016. You guys let me know your thoughts on all of that in the comment section below. But yeah, until next time, folks, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Alpha moves only. God bless. Have a very great rest of your day. And congratulations to the Europeans. Peace.